Hey y'all, this is Anissa Khalifa. This week, we're sharing an excerpt from another show made here at WUNC. It's called Due South. It's a daily radio show and podcast that dives into news, culture, and perspectives from across North Carolina and the South. In this conversation, Leoneda Inge, one of the co-hosts of Due South, has a conversation with one woman who has dedicated her career to teaching the teachers about Native American culture and history. Dr. Brittany Hunt is an assistant professor at the Virginia Tech School of Education. Her work focuses on eradicating stereotypes and centering Indigenous stories in K-12 classrooms.
People don't believe that natives are Southerners. They don't believe that we live in the South. Again, they believe we're kind of away somewhere out west or somewhere else, but not here.
Hunt is a member of the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina and was raised in Robeson County. We'll hear her conversation from Due South just after this break.
What can 160 years of experience teach you about the future? When it comes to protecting what matters, Pacific Life provides life insurance, retirement income, and employee benefits for people and businesses building a more confident tomorrow. Strategies rooted in strength and backed by experience. Ask a financial professional how Pacific Life can help you today. Pacific Life Insurance Company, Omaha, Nebraska, and in New York. Pacific Life and Annuity, Phoenix, Arizona.
This is Due South on WUNC. I'm Leoneda Inge. Native American culture is quite nuanced. There is no one way to define a group of people who are native and indigenous to this country. But I think Due South has found the perfect teacher who can explain native culture, its people, and also delve into the harmful stereotypes that need to be dispelled. Here is Dr. Brittany Hunt giving her TEDx talk at UNC Charlotte.
Think for one moment about what you learned. For most people, it goes something like this. Columbus discovered America, though there were already people here. Then Thanksgiving happened and the Pilgrims and Indians had a nice little meal together. That wasn't nice. And then there was the Trail of Tears, if you learn about that at all. And that's it.
She earned her PhD in Curriculum and Instruction at UNC Charlotte. Today, she is an assistant professor at the Virginia Tech School of Education. Hunt grew up in Lumberton, North Carolina, in Robeson County, where it seems like everyone is Lumbee. It was a village that kept her safe.
A lot of my teachers were Native. I had Native principals. I went to a Native church. I lived in a Native community and then turned 18 and got into Duke University. Actually, it's the only college I applied to, which looking back is very, I don't know, egotistical of me. But I got in, so I don't know. I got in and I went in 2008 and I experienced what I would describe as extreme culture shock. And so coming from this community that had a large Indigenous presence to then being at Duke, which had a very, very small Indigenous population, I was one of maybe 5 Indigenous students on campus, was majorly shocking to me. And so not only that kind of isolation of going from one of many to one of a few, but then having my peers always questioning me about my Indigenous identity. So they would say, "What are you?" And then I would say, "I'm Native." And they would say, "Well, are you sure?" Or they would say, "Well, what part Native are you?" Everyone was always expecting me to be kind of part Native and never in full. And I don't think that's something that really happens to other races of people. People don't generally question people to that degree. And so it became something that felt like it was really, I was being interrogated for, or I was kind of on trial for. So that was really, really difficult for me.
Well, one thing that I definitely heard when you entered Duke University, you wanted to be a doctor. You wanted to be a pediatrician, for example. But because of your experiences there, you kind of changed gears. You decided to go into education.
Yes, I did. So from all of the crazy and weird and strange comments that people made to me about being Indigenous, it kind of, I guess, funneled me into the career path that I'm on now, which is I'm a professor and I teach about Indigenous education, and I teach a lot about stereotypes of Indigenous people and how we can kind of disentangle our minds from these stereotypes. And so, yeah, that my negative experiences there kind of funneled me into a profession now that I think is very positive and can really help to transform people's lives and people's mindsets about indigeneity.
You graduated with your PhD. You went to Duke for undergrad and then UNC Chapel Hill, and then you made it to UNC Charlotte to really just lay the foundation for the work that you do today. But tell me about that dissertation and what it took to get that done.
Yeah, so with my dissertation, I interviewed a group of Indigenous students who are in urban schools throughout North Carolina. And so one thing about, I grew up, like I mentioned before, in Lumberton, North Carolina, and I went to school with lots of Indigenous people, had Indigenous teachers and principals. However, I did not learn very much about indigeneity in the classroom at all, even though I grew up in an Indigenous community. But I still had kind of the protection of my community around me as kind of a buffer to what I was learning in the classroom. But Native students who are in bigger cities in North Carolina or who are kind of isolated from their tribal communities don't have that buffer. And so these students shared with me a lot of negative experiences that they've had in the classroom, either from teachers teaching in very harmful ways about Indigenous students or from their peers making really negative comments to them about their indigeneity. And so the title of my dissertation, where it says, "I'm going to tell you that we're not a myth," is a direct quote from a Native student who was in Raleigh-Durham schools. And she talked a lot about how indigeneity for her in her classrooms was presented as a mythology. And so what they learned about Indigenous people was just the lost colony. And so in North Carolina schools, we learn a lot about the lost colony. We learn that, there's this group of settlers who were out in Roanoke, and then they believe that perhaps they were kind of adopted by a Native American community or Native nation, and that's kind of a mythology that's taught in school that really is not backed by lots of scientific evidence. And
then about the lost colony, it went on to say that they slaughtered everyone there.
Right. And then that being the only lesson that you learn about Indigenous people, and you're learning about it in the context of like, oh, it's this mysterious myth. What happened to Virginia Dare? Oh, did natives take them? That is harmful because you're not then giving any complementary lessons about actual facts about Indigenous nations and Indigenous people. You're just teaching about us in the context of, again, this mythology. There was even someone who said something to me once. They were like, well, you can't be Native because you have a Southern accent. And Natives are supposed to sound mystical, is what someone said to me. So also it kind of, people don't believe that Natives are Southerners. They don't believe that we live in the South. Again, they believe we're kind of away somewhere out west or somewhere else, but not here.
I grew up in Tallahassee, Florida, and in that whole region of Florida, almost everything actually even has a native name.
Yeah.
So if it's one
Tallahassee.
thing, and I'm actually sort of really embarrassed that I had never heard of the Lumbees until I moved to North Carolina when I became a reporter here. Just like I had never heard of the Potawatomis before I moved to Milwaukee, and I just did not know, that you existed.
Now, would you say that in your education when you were in school, did you learn a lot about Seminoles?
I don't recall. You know why I didn't? And I'll put this on the record. I attended a school that was K through 12, but it was across the railroad tracks from Florida State University. It was at Florida A&M University, which is a historically Black institution, founded in, 1887? And so, no, we were taught a different kind of history there. We were historically Black. And so, but I don't recall learning a lot about Native people there either.
But I think, too, that highlights the larger issue that when we do learn about Natives in the classroom, there's no specificity. We learn these kind of sweeping generalizations that don't really get into the nitty-gritty of history in the way we do about other groups of people. And so when I think, for example, of when I learned in school about the Renaissance or the Greeks or the Romans, I learned very specific facts about leaders and their religion or their political structures or governments. But then when we learn about Indigenous people, it's kind of just like these big sweeping generalizations that don't really highlight that, in fact, there are more than 500 Indigenous nations in the U.S., and there are many different language groups and cultures, and Indigenous people are fundamentally different from each other depending on where we are geographically. And I think that, again, that highlights a larger issue in schools.
Well, tell me, how do you make Native history more nuanced, in your teaching? I know you use the television show Reservation Dogs to do that.
Yeah, so I am really inspired by the concept of Indigenous joy. I think a lot of times when people learn about Indigenous folks in schools, it's always in the context of trauma or sadness or some other misery. And in reality, Indigenous people have experienced these things, these traumas, but we are also, like I mentioned before, an inherently joyful people. And so teaching about Indigenous joy to me is as important as teaching about Indigenous suffering. And I think the show Reservation Dogs, which is on Hulu, I recommend everybody to watch it. They should pay me some money for shouting them out. But I think that show does a great job of highlighting both. And so the show tackles issues of suicide and of Indigenous generational trauma, but it also is inherently a comedy, and it's very funny, and it's about Indigenous kids just like getting into trouble that kids get into, and them laughing and, I don't know, eating chips or doing other stuff that just kids do. And I think showing something like that in the classroom is really important because it just positions and shows Native people as just being regular people. And I think the average American does not consider Native people to just be normal. They think about us, again, as like mystical, like I mentioned earlier, or mythological, or like a unicorn almost. And so just showing that in the classroom, I think, really adds to the nuance that I really need my students to understand.
Now, is there a favorite episode or a favorite scene that that you always make sure your students are familiar with?
They have to actually watch the first 2 seasons, so it's like a lot of...
2 seasons, yeah.
Yeah, they do. But there is one particular scene for me in the show, and folks who've watched the show will remember this as being really important, where one of the kids goes to a prison to visit an Indigenous auntie in her community.
Put your hands up on the table, like we just did.
And then that auntie is praying for her.
Close your eyes. We're gonna have a little prayer.
It kind of is this moment of emotional catharsis for this young teenager. And then she's closing her eyes while she's praying. And then behind her, there are all these Indigenous ancestors who've passed on who are praying over her too. And that, for me, in a lot of ways, sums up what it is to be Indigenous. Knowing that you don't just come as yourself. It's never just you. You have all of your ancestors who are always going to be behind you at all times. And so that moment was very impactful for me, and I think impactful for a lot of Indigenous people.
They're watching you, my girl. You don't need me. You have them.
You're listening to a conversation between Dr. Brittany Hunt, assistant professor at the Virginia Tech School of Education, and Leoneda Inge, co-host of Due South. We'll be back for more of their conversation after this break. ExpressVPN is like tinted windows for your internet connection. You can see out, but they can't see in. Wouldn't you want the same privacy online? Because all your traffic flows through their servers, your internet service provider, and that includes your mobile network provider, knows every single website you visit. And in the US, ISPs are legally allowed to sell that information to advertisers. ExpressVPN reroutes 100% of your traffic through secure, encrypted servers, so your ISP can't see your browsing history. It hides your IP address, making it extremely difficult for third parties to track your online activity. It works on every device, phones, tablets, laptops, and it's easy to use. All you need to do is fire up the app and click a single button to be protected. I just downloaded and set up ExpressVPN, and it was way easier than I expected. And as a journalist, the peace of mind it gives me to know my internet activity can't be tracked by anyone feels especially important right now. Secure your online data today by visiting expressvpn.com/broadside. That's expressvpn.com/broadside to find out how you can get up to 4 extra months. expressvpn.com/broadside. You know that one person that you struggle to come up with a gift for? For me, it's my grandma. She was a minimalist before that was even a thing. But even for someone like her who doesn't want more stuff, a Cove Pure water purifier is a great gift. It sits on the counter and is easy to use. Just plug it in and fill it up with tap water. And it has size presets so she can drink exactly the amount of clean, great-tasting water she needs. And remember to get enough hydration throughout the day. Most importantly, Cove Pure is lab certified to remove up to 99.9% of contaminants from your water. That includes stuff like PFAS, pharmaceuticals, fluoride, lead, arsenic. It's the purest water you can get. So, if you're looking for a gift that's good for your loved ones, and one that they'll actually use, I highly recommend Cove Pure. And because I've partnered with them, they're giving you a special $250 holiday discount with my link, covepure.com/broadside. That's covepure.com/broadside to get $250 off. covepure.com/broadside. Hurry before the sale ends.
I went with Yo-Yo Ma to the top of the highest peak in the Smoky Mountains.
The Cherokee people had always thought of that mountain as a spiritual location to open up a porthole into a wider universe.
I'm Ana Gonzalez, and I've been traveling with Yo-Yo Ma around the country and meeting people like Leoneda Hill, who's on a mission to change this mountain back to its Cherokee name.
Kohi is the mulberry place.
Listen to Our Common Nature from WNYC wherever you get podcasts.
There was something I really wanted to ask Dr. Brittany Hunt about her thoughts on November being Native American Heritage Month.
Yeah, it's a difficult month for Indigenous people. Thanksgiving also happens in this month, and so that makes it even more complicated because the Thanksgiving story that's taught in school is so far off from the real story of what happened. That would be an entire other talk that would need to happen on NPR, and then oftentimes in the schools, teachers use that as a moment to have kids dress up like pilgrims and Indians. And it's often a month that's really fraught with Indigenous stereotypes. And it's also coming off of the heels of Columbus Day, which we know that many people still celebrate Columbus Day. And Indigenous Peoples Day is only recognized in certain states. And so November is difficult, I think, for that reason. Also, lots of times Indigenous people are kind of really tapped out because we're called to do different talks and workshops and events for all these different places, but then we're kind of forgot about the entire other 11 months of the year. And so it can be a good time. It's kind of a double-edged sword. It's a good time because folks are learning more about indigeneity, but it also has these other kind of harmful things kind of tied to it as well.
Tell me about it. Black History Month is in February.
Yeah, the shortest month.
The shortest month of the year. We hear that all the time.
Yeah.
Well, you know what, Dr. Hunt, when I was even preparing for this interview, I was just stumped. I said, do I use the term Native American? Or do I use American Indian? Or do I use Indigenous peoples? I mean, when it comes to names and preferences, what do you prefer?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I get this question a lot. I would say the best term to call an Indigenous person would be whatever their tribe is. And so I would first identify as being Lumbee. But then you may not always know what someone's tribe is, right? So I would say Indigenous is probably maybe the safest term, but even that is kind of complicated, I think, amongst elders. There are many Indigenous elders who have not even heard the term Indigenous because that's not something that was used 50 years ago. And so they will call themselves Indian, or they'll say American Indian. And some, even fewer, I think, say Native American. To me, that's like I don't know, it's the most stuffy term in a certain
I
way,
know.
but that's a hard question to answer. I would say tribe is the best. There's really no way to go wrong if you call someone by the tribe they identify as. Indigenous may be a second best, but maybe ask the person. I think it's always better to ask that person how they prefer to be identified. And I think different Indigenous people have different preferences.
I think I was reading that the problem with American Indian is that a lot of Native people do not like to use the term Indian.
Yes, so lots of Native people don't like to use that term, and it also is obviously an inaccurate term. However, there are many Native people who do use that term. Lots of Lumbee people actually use that term. So yeah, it's a complicated issue, and I think it's best to just always ask when possible.
She's used her talent and passion to elevate the voices of Native people. And now, as a new mother, she tells stories to her child and others in a new book called Who's Your People? A very popular phrase.
Who's Your People is about as Lumbee of a phrase as you can get. And so when you meet, oftentimes when a Lumbee meets another Lumbee for the first time, or even if they're not a Lumbee meeting a Lumbee, they might ask you, who's your people? And in Western society or American culture, oftentimes we'll ask, what do you do for work? That's our kind of first question that you ask. And if you really think about it, that's kind of a hierarchical way to establish a connection with someone. But who's your people is a great equalizer. When you ask someone that, you want to know, who is your grandma? Who is your cousin? Or am I related to you in some way? Or do I know your auntie? It's a way to just establish a connection with another person in the way that I think American culture doesn't often do when we're first meeting someone. And so that's the name of the book. And the book tells the story of a little Lumbee boy named Henry. He grew up in Baltimore, which actually lots of Lumbee people grew up there. A lot of Lumbee people moved there in the 50s, including my own family. My mom was born there as well, but they moved back to Robeson County when she was 3 years old. But it's the story of him. He's moving back to Lumbee territory, and he's going to go to school on the first day, and he's really nervous about not having any friends. And then when he gets to school, every person is asking him, who's your people? And they're saying, I know your grandma, or I know your uncle, or I know your aunt. And in the book, too, my niece and nephew are mentioned by name. They will tell you that they are embarrassed by this, but secretly they are really proud because they want me to come to their school and read the book. And so throughout the course of the book, like I mentioned, Henry realizes that he's not alone, that in fact, lots of people know him, and that he's going to be okay. So that's the gist of the book.
Well, can you read just a little bit for us?
Yes, I can. So the portion I'm starting at, there's an elder who is reading a book to the children at the end of the book, and I'll go ahead and start that now. It says, at the end of the day, an elder named Mr. Jim came to read a book as planned. He told them about the Battle of Hayes Pond and how Lumbees always defend their land. Henry's heart filled with pride. He thought, maybe I do belong. He started to see he wasn't alone. He had a whole people to make him strong. And later on, the elder said, son, come sit with me a spell. I know your family real good. I know that you'll do well. Henry, don't you know there's much power in your kin? And when we ask who's your people, we want to know who you are and who you've always been. Now go on now, get on the bus, tell your mama and them I said hey. I'll probably see you at church this week or at Fuller's on Sunday. Henry walked off so amazed, saying bye to Mr. Jim, thinking these really are my people. They know me and I know them.
Well, that's special.
Thank
Mama
you.
and them. Did you say mama and them?
Mama and I said it with a D. Mama and
Mama
them.
and them. That's lovely.
Yes.
And hopefully it's
you.
being circulated not just through Lumbee territory,
Yeah.
but definitely all the tribes, across the country.
And even non-natives as well. A program at the North Carolina Museum of History, they did a program for kids there who were mostly non-native, and a few of them got my book. And so I've been really happy with how well it's done so far, and very happy to have written a book that's specifically for Lumbee people, but also hoping that other folks also get a hold of a copy as well.
Well, it's been a delight having you on Due South today. Thank you very much for your time and actually teaching us a lot about what would make us better in our quest and everyone's quest to make sure that we understand Native peoples more and Respect the culture.
Yes, thank you so much, and thank you, Leoneda.
That was an excerpt from a conversation between Dr. Brittany Hunt, assistant professor at the Virginia Tech School of Education, and Leoneda Inge, co-host of Due South. Due South is a daily radio show and podcast made by our parent station, WUNC. You can check out their show Monday through Friday at wunc.org/Due South or wherever you get your podcasts. The original version of this story was produced by Rachel McCarthy and Leoneda Inge. Thanks for listening.
This November, action is free on Pluto TV. Go on the run with Jack Reacher.
Every suspect was a train killer.
Then buckle up for Drive, World War Z.
Every human being we save is one less to fight.
And Charlie's Angels.
Damn, I hate to fly.
Launch into sci-fi adventure with The Fifth Element and laugh through the mayhem in Tropic Thunder.
What is going on here?
All the thrills, all for free. Pluto TV. Stream now. Pay never.